What's up, guys? I'm EJ. Thank you guys for checking out this edition of the Uncommitted podcast. This is episode 10, so a little bit of a mini milestone for us reaching the 10 episode mark here on this basketball recruiting podcast. I'm joined, of course, with my co-host Kendall. Kendall, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. A really fun conversation regarding some of the major programs, some of the big moves they've made regarding Duke and Kentucky, some other big commitments we saw over the past month. And I think a little bit of a mini resurgence maybe happening to a previous power, a past power in our local area. So I got a lot to talk about today. I'm excited to have you back on. What are you excited to talk about today?
Yeah, a lot of interesting topics. I think coming off the heels of our last episode where we talked about the, commitment of Imani Bates and Jalen Duren at Memphis. That was quite the message that was sent to the recruiting world from Penny Hardaway and the Memphis Tigers, and I want to say that John Calipari sent back a little message of his of his own right in the last week or two with the commitments they've landed. So I'm excited to talk about those, and I'm also excited to talk about Duke. I think we touched on them a little bit in our last show, but they've since got another commitment, and we will really get a chance to dive into the the early tenure of Jon Scheyer as Duke's coach in waiting.
Yeah, I think in many ways, Calipari might have been like, 2021 may have been yours, Penny, but 2022 is mine. I think that was kind of the statement that we saw from Coach Cal with this recruiting class. Let's get right to it. So it's been a big month for the University of Kentucky as the school notched two major commitments to lift this class to the number one recruiting class in the 2022 rankings. So this week, Chris Livingston, a bounty 5-star small forward from Akron, Ohio. No, we're not talking about LeBron James, a different bouncy small forward from Akron. He announced that he will be joining the Wildcats just this week. Earlier in the month, Shaedon Sharpe, who climbed up to number one in terms of the top 2022 players in both ESPN's rankings and 247 Sports rankings. A lot of momentum from his standpoint. I know we talked about who may be that number one player after all the shifting and moving with of course the guys that went over to Memphis. Sharpe right now taking that mantle at number one. Earlier in the month, he announced that he was going to Kentucky as well. So Big Blue Nation, a lot to be excited about. As if those two guys aren't scary enough, you already got 5-star point guard Sky Clark, who committed way last year to Kentucky. And there's several other top players that are still in the hunt in terms of Kentucky trying to perhaps bring them in as well.
Yes.
Derek Lively II, Carson Wallace, two guys. Those Casey Wallace, two guys that definitely could potentially be wearing that Kentucky blue. So if all goes right, this could end up being, Kendall, a historic class, which is saying a lot by Kentucky standards, but I don't think that would be hyperbole at all. Are you surprised to see the Big Blue Haul it appears we're heading towards in terms of what Coach Cal's been able to put together?
Am I surprised? Look, as a guy who, obviously followed John Calipari's career for a long time, as most people, it's hard to say that I am surprised. What I'm surprised is that we're asking the question, we kind of have to ask the question, is Kentucky back? And that is not something that you typically ask for a program that, makes the NCAA tournament almost perennially, and is a SEC title contender almost perennially. That's something you ask about Texas football or Nebraska football or, Indiana basketball. It's not necessarily something you ask about Kentucky basketball. But there's been obviously a little bit of a lull. We've talked about it on this podcast quite a bit. Kentucky fans understand that. The days of John Wall and the days of De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk, the days of Carl Anthony Towns and Nerlens Noel and all these guys that were top three, top four
Patino
guys.
game. It's Patino game. Those guys aren't walking through that door.
Those guys are not walking.
Those guys have not been walking through that door for a long time.
I mean, the stat.
We've seen it in how they finished their seasons the past few years.
Yeah, I mean the stat that solidifies that narrative is that before Shaedon Sharpe, the last consensus top five guy that they landed, which was Skal Labissière in 2015. And it feels even longer than that because Skal Labissière obviously did not play like a consensus top five guy when he got there. So it's been a really long time really since Karl-Anthony Towns that they've had a guy that's been a program changer walk in there and have that sort of cachet, you know, from day one. And that's what they're gonna have with Shaedon Sharpe. That's what they're gonna have with Chris Livingston. And like you mentioned, obviously, you know, this class may not be done. To me, what I think echoes the change in recruiting for Kentucky is not even, I haven't heard this, you know, narrative, or I haven't heard this framed this way. But when you think about Kentucky basketball, and I think about the roster they have now, you know, they have some good players. They had a good recruiting class come in, Ty Washington and Derek Hopkins on, you know, on the roster, or Bryce Hopkins rather on the roster. They have a good team, but I feel like in that period, the last 4 or 5 years, for example, they've been able to have guys that have been able to come back for 2-3 years. You know, look at Keon Brooks, who's coming back now for, what is he, a junior? You know, and they're bringing back guys like Lance Ware, who's coming back from that team last year, and you know Jacob Toppin, who had a nice year as a transfer last season. They're bringing those types of guys back, and that's not something that could have happened, you know, back in the day, because they used to bring in the number one recruiting class. So guys, if they weren't up to snuff, they had to get out of there. You know, because they weren't going to get playing time. And I you know, put pressure. There's a little bit of pressure on the guys on this year's roster to perform, because if you don't, you're going to be backing up Shaedon Sharpe next year. Right. You're going to be backing up Chris Livingston. You're going to be potentially backing up a Derek Lively or a Kason Wallace. And that's not something that Kentucky basketball has had in half a decade. So that used to be the pressure that we saw at Kentucky year in and year out for the guys on that roster. So it's a real shift, obviously, in Kentucky basketball, but these are two dynamic players. But what's your impression?
Yeah, I mean, look, I in some ways, you know, it's like the evil empire returns. You know, it's Empire Strikes Back kind of deal. I mean, I don't know how many times we had a conversation on this podcast saying, you know, is Kentucky... Well, I don't think we were even saying, is Kentucky's run over? I think we were trying to explain to our audience that Kentucky's run was over, given the kind of success we saw them have in the beginning of Cal's era, and then what we've been seeing recently. Now, this class is a class that 100%, you know, you bring these guys in and you add a couple more pieces, guys who are all content. Again, you're talking about Wiles and Lively, you're talking about consensus top 10 guys. You add those two guys with the guys they already got, you're talking about a national championship contender. There's no conversation of, well, will they make it and how will they do? I mean, you're right in the picture. So there's a great chance for Calipari to really kind of have a little bit of a renaissance and a resurgence over there in Lexington, because it's been some lean years, and it's been lean years by their standards, to be fair, because we know Kentucky's standards are super high, and they've had some decent years where they made the tournament and won a game or two. Last year obviously was a big disappointment with all the stuff that happened with their team, and the COVID stuff didn't help as well. But it's I can't say I'm surprised, but it is a little like you do gasp a little bit. You're like, wow, we just haven't seen Kentucky do this. I don't know what's changed. I don't know. Usually, you know, you can kind of point to something that happens with the program or on the recruiting trail. You say, okay, this thing changed. I mean, is Jai Lucas making that much of an impact on the recruiting trail? I mean, he's
Orlando Antigua.
Or Antigua is back. You know,
when I point back to that era of Kentucky basketball, true. You know, that's about the time when Orlando Antigua was an assistant. And
that's a great point.
Orlando Antigua comes back. They also bring in another assistant from Illinois, Chin Coleman, and you know, on top of Jai Lucas. I mean, obviously the Lucas name in Texas is royalty.
Yeah.
You know, Kason Wallace, you know, is from Texas. You know, he's gonna be, you know, that I can tell you who got Kason Wallace. I'm not a Kentucky insider, but I can tell you who probably got Kason Wallace if they get Kason Wallace. But some of those other guys, I mean, you know, I think about the Orlando Antigua impact, and this is not something that they've seen in a long time at Kentucky.
Yeah, and then talk a little bit about these players. What should college basketball fans and Kentucky fans expect with Livingston and Sharpe?
And NBA fans?
Yeah, I know. I mean, we could probably start that conversation at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I love about this pairing of adding these two guys to this recruiting class is that it really speaks to the modern game of basketball and what we're seeing now that teams are liking to do in the NBA. I mean, and it's not this, not the buzzword of positionless basketball, or the buzz term of positionless basketball, but more so, having these two dynamic two-way wings that are uber athletic, can score the ball at a high volume. Doesn't it remind you of what the LA Clippers are building, with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, building your team around two, dynamic two-way wings? Doesn't it remind you what the Boston Celtics have built with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Also two dynamic, athletic, two-way, high scoring, high scoring, high volume scoring type of wings. And that's what Kentucky is building right now with Shaedon Sharpe and Chris Livingston. When they step on the floor, they're going to have probably the two most athletic players on the floor.
Yeah.
Because these are the two most athletic, two most bouncy, or two bounciest players in this class. And they're both going to Kentucky. And they're the two best wing players in this class as well. I mean, you have to be excited if you're a Kentucky fan. Back in 2005, I may have been concerned about how these two players that overlap in skill set fit. But like I said, nowadays, teams like overlapping skill sets. They like having guys that do a lot of the same things if they can defend. If they can defend and they can play, they're good offensive players.
They can defend multiple positions.
Give me 20 of those guys. Exactly, and they can play multiple positions. So, do I think that these guys are, do I think these guys are both they're not going to average 20 points in college, but there's going to be a ton of highlights. I think that this will be closer to what they had with, the Malik Monks and the Jamal Murrays and the guys that were really big time scorers, and also guys that can make highlight plays. So I think Kentucky fans should be excited, and I think these two guys, regardless of how else they build the class, I think these two guys are going to be the best two players on next year's Kentucky team.
And it's funny because you talk about versatility, and I mean Livingston is just he's just so long, so rangy. I love the way he gets after it defensively in terms of how he can get in the passing lanes and really cause havoc with those long arms. Some ways reminding me a bit of a young Plastic Man, Stacey Augmon, from back in the day.
He reminds me a lot of Jaylen Brown, man. Like Jaylen Brown now, he's more skilled, I think, than Jaylen Brown was in high school. He's not maybe as skilled as Jaylen Brown is now, but they a more raw version of Jaylen Brown now.
Yeah, and then Sharpe,
exciting.
Yeah, and Sharpe is he's a bucket getter. He's the kind of guy where you can get him the rock, he can isolate, he can throw his body around the basket. He's excellent finishing around the basket, as you've mentioned. So you adding these two kind of athletes with who they may put together. Clark running the one. It's scary hours right now in Lexington, and it may only get worse for other teams in the next few months with the other guys.
And with Shaedon Sharpe
soon as well.
With Shaedon Sharpe, he's a guy that really flew under the radar for a long time. Definitely. In his high school career. He played for a program in Canada, UPlay, that R.J. Barrett came out of, and Jamal Murray and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Primo, and I think they have a lot of weight, a lot of pull in the Kentucky, or not in the Kentucky landscape, but just in the basketball landscape in general. Yeah. I think about, even we're both NBA draft guys. I think about Josh Primo getting drafted as early as he did. Makes me wonder if that had anything to do with the background that he's coming from, and the program that he's coming from, and the success that guys that have come out of that program and come out of the Canadian basketball system in general have had. Shaedon Sharpe feels like he may be the next one, and obviously Calipari had a lot of success with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's another sleeper kind of guy. Shaedon Sharpe obviously not a sleeper anymore, but was at one point, and now is going to step into Kentucky and may exceed even my expectations, because I say he's not going to average 20 points, but I don't know. He may wind up being the closest thing we've seen to Vince Carter. Right. At by the time we get to the draft and we're doing comps, 2 years from now, like we may be saying this guy might be the next Vince Carter. So
Yeah,
again,
again.
also exciting. If I'm comping
Yeah.
guys to Jalen Brown and Vince Carter, it's a good way to start your recruiting class.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of smiles over there in Lexington right now. Let's head over now to Durham, where big things are happening there as well this summer. We know, of course, it's a big season with Mike Krzyzewski getting ready to coach his final season at Duke. The post Coach K Blue Devils will be led by assistant coach Jon Scheyer, and they're getting a really good boost out of what they were able to do this summer on the recruiting trail. So earlier this month, Illinois guard Jaden Schutt, he committed to Duke. He joins an already strong class that includes, of course, Dariq Whitehead, Kyle Filipowski. They both committed to Duke over the summer. So, Kendall, we've spoken at length about the challenges that come with trying to replace a legend the caliber of Mike Krzyzewski. But does Scheyer's success on the recruiting trail that we've seen in this early period show that maybe he may be just fine, at least in the short term, in terms of following Coach K here?
So in terms of replacing Coach K, I mean, I feel like this is an awesome sign, because I feel like when you talk about when the guy replaces the legend, uh, where do the mishaps happen? Where do things fall off, and where do things when guys fail? Where do they go wrong? And when guys succeed, where do they go right? I say recruiting is a big part of that. And when I look at college football, when you look at programs like Oklahoma replacing Bob Stoops with Lincoln Riley, and Ohio State with Ryan Day and Urban Meyer, or Jimbo Fisher a long time ago with Bobby Bowden, like those programs from a recruiting standpoint, never they almost got better, when those guys left, if not stayed the same. And when I think about programs that guys have struggled, sometimes you have a situation like like USC, when Pete Carroll left and Lane Kiffin came in, and he didn't have the scholarships to be able to recruit at the same level, and that obviously has sanctions and stuff. But when you don't have the talent, that's not a good place to start. When I look at Jon Scheyer, he's gonna have a team next season with Dariq Whitehead, Kyle Filipowski, and Jaden Schutt that is talent-wise, and assuming guys, I mean, this team isn't built like Kentucky where you're expecting everybody to leave. They're gonna have guys that are coming back on this year's roster, potentially transfers. He's gonna have a team that'll be favorites to win the ACC in his first season from a talent perspective. Whether or not they, people have certain expectations of Scheyer as an on-court coach, but on paper they're gonna have the best roster in the ACC. So this is an excellent sign, and what I think we see with all three of those guys is, I think we're seeing Jon Scheyer's initial recruiting footprint. Dariq Whitehead's a kid from Newark, New Jersey. Filipowski's a kid from New York, and Jaden Schutt's a kid from Illinois, which is Jon Scheyer's backyard. And you watch him a little bit, and there's obviously a lot of shades of Jon Scheyer's game. There's no doubt that was part of the recruiting pitch. I believe Schutt even said that in an interview after he committed. So, I think we're seeing look, Duke's a national program. Coach K, I don't know what to make of Coach K's recruiting by the end. It was, just pulling the best player. It wasn't about any sort of geography. It was about, where you ranked in the top 15. But still, I think we saw a lot more of a national footprint as opposed to, selectively recruiting different areas. I think Scheyer, I think we're going to see a little bit more about. I don't think he's going to be able to go to California and just pull anybody, or go to Florida and just beat anybody. I think it's going to have to be certain guys. And, Filipowski's AAU program, the New York Rens, is run by, a former Duke player. And that's going to be something to pay attention to when other top guys come out of that program. And again, Whitehead, a kid also in that tri-state area, and then a kid right in that Illinois area. So, great start for Jon Scheyer.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a lot worse than kind of starting your recruiting footprint in the tri-state area and Illinois. Chicago area. Like
Yes.
there's a lot. You can do a lot. You can do worse. Trust me. And I think that's a smart place for Scheyer to go. I think if there's something that's interesting about when we think about what coach, because you say what has Duke become in the late Coach K years, and again a lot of it felt like just plucking whoever the top 2 or 3 guys were. But I do think that like.
But who do you want?
Yeah, I mean, look, like Duke definitely. I feel like over the last, I guess 5 to 10 years. I don't know, maybe 10 is maybe too much, but they definitely had a Hollywood feel to who they brought in, how they promoted themselves, like the Duke post Kyrie Irving is a different Duke pre Kyrie, in my opinion. Like I think to me his recruitment kind of like, and then what they became. All this stuff about the brotherhood.
Him being the number 1 pick, yeah. Exactly.
Right, he was not picking the draft, of course, but like to me, like that started this whole brotherhood thing, being super active on social media. They're wearing like 8 different jerseys throughout the year. Like it's just not the same Duke. It's not a diss to Duke. I mean, Duke is one of the best programs in the country, but it's clear there was a shift. Duke was the slap the floor, getting the defensive stance. And it was about guys graduating 4 years, and it was just a different
balls.
It was a different energy. It was a different energy. It wasn't. It was not the we're gonna get the most talented, the most flashiest guys and bring them to Durham. That's just not what they were about. So I'm curious. Because Scheyer was an assistant coach for most of this time. So will we see that same kind of Hollywood feel?
But he was also the last class.
Right, that maybe wasn't like that.
That brand.
That's a great point.
Basketball.
Right. So does he go back to more of what he remembers Duke was as when he was a player, where he was, again, probably the last generation of the slap the floor and get in defensive stance Duke? Or does he more go in line with who he was as a coach in terms of the team Krzyzewski was putting together and he helped put together, which is, again, more of this Hollywood feel. I mean, to me, Duke rivaled Kentucky. Like Kentucky was a Hollywood team, and then Duke kind of took that spot as the Hollywood team, and they did almost all the same things that Kentucky was doing at that time, and they ended up rivaling them, and then surpassing them. I think that Scheyer's early coaching years and how he implements his identity is going to be very fascinating, because it could go either way, or he could try to do a mix of both. I think the first signs we're seeing is more of the old school Duke, but time will tell.
Are there concerns when I talk about that geographic footprint? I mean, look, these are only 3 guys. I mean, these are all,
and they're all great players.
Yeah, 2 5-stars and a high 4-star.
Yeah.
I mean, this could be an indication of the recruiting footprint, or it could just be an indication of these are 3 guys we wanted and we got it. Derek Lively, obviously, is going to be a big, guy for them and Kentucky. I think that's going to be.
That would also be in the Northeast area, by the way.
Be another Northeast guy. Yeah. That's going to be a huge message. That's the biggest recruiting battle of the 2022 class. Duke and Kentucky competing for Lively, because Calipari is trying to send his message, and the message is getting out there, but it hasn't been completely sent. It's at 75% loading. But Scheyer had the chance to come in here and stop the message from failing to send if he's able to get Derek Lively to go to Duke, and I mean that class would honestly compete.
It would rival with Kentucky's class for sure.
The number 1 recruiting class in the country. So, it's a really big deal for that recruitment. But does that trend of recruiting footprint, where you're talking about the Northeast and the Chicago area where he's from, does it concern you that we're not talking about North Carolina, where obviously that's where Duke is? But
let's be honest though, Kendall. I mean,
Coach
K didn't really recruit North Carolina really much either. At least not recently. How many great players from North Carolina didn't go to Duke and were upset they weren't recruited by Duke over the past 10 years or whatever? I mean, that to me is you're right. Not that is that something to think about? It is. But I mean, it didn't stop Coach K the last 10, 15 years. I mean, he wasn't. I can't think of a guy from North Carolina. I know we've had guys from South Carolina, obviously, in Zion, but a guy from North Carolina that was like a major impact for Duke in any recent years. I mean, you can think of somebody. I can't think of anyone.
I can't think of anyone.
And there have been plenty of good players that have come out of that state.
It's funny, I remember when you said that when they got Paolo Banchero, we talked about it on the Uncommitted, and you were like, when's the last time they got a guy from, the Pacific Northwest? And people in the comments were like, you don't remember Carlos Boozer? Kyle Singler? And it was like, oh, well, look, I mean,
it's a long time. That's my point.
I mean, it's a long time, yeah. There's definitely guys that they've gotten from North Carolina, but it doesn't come off the top of my head.
Yeah, it doesn't come off the top of your head of who those guys be. Apologies if there's some great player we're forgetting, but
I wonder if that's Coach K's influence. Where look, Scheyer, like you said, has been on the staff for almost a decade now. Like some of his coaching influence and his strategy is going to be based off of what Coach K like to do, and if Coach K said it's not worth it for us. Most guys, for whatever reason, if most guys grow up in the state, they want to go to Carolina, or they're going to be recruited by some other school, or they want to go to Wake Forest, they want to go to NC State. That's something to consider. I think obviously there's a new coach in North Carolina as well, so this would be an interesting time to want to say maybe we do become the flagship school locally, but they also didn't hire a guy that's from North Carolina.
I mean, everything I've ever read about the dynamics of fandom and loyalties in the state of North Carolina is that like Duke is like an outsider within its state. It's very weird.
Right.
Like so much of this state can't stand Duke. So like, yes, there are a lot of kids who grew up and want to go to Duke, but there are a lot of people who can't stand Duke and will never mess with Duke on any level. So like, I think that it does come with some disadvantage. I don't know if that ever. Like I don't know, like if the coaching thing can change that. Like that's generations of a kind of a standard that's been set, where Duke is a national program. They're like the Yankees, but like it's unlike the Yankees, where in their own city or in their own state, like it's not necessarily, it's not all love. It's definitely not. So like it's always been a weird thing, and every time I've read or heard anybody talk about it, I've always been fascinated because I'm like, how does a program with such with so much success, so much prestige, seem to kind of struggle with like actually captivating much of the state? But Duke is
so I got the list of
that's just what it is.
I got the list of North Carolina guys. We missed.
I saw you on your phone. I was like, what's he doing here? I'm gonna stretch this. I'm gonna stretch this analogy as long as I can before he gets re-engaged in the conversation.
Checking my fantasy roster. No, I'm joking. So they've got right now on the roster, they got Wendell Moore, who's from Carolina, which okay,
that's fair.
Not the biggest guy, but he was an All-American.
Yes, he's All-American.
But the big names that they have gotten, Brandon Ingram was a big one, who I believe actually grew up as a North Carolina fan. And played for Jerry Stackhouse, who's the AAU team. That was a big one that they got. And then Harry Giles was also a big one. From Winston Salem.
So it's almost so it seems like Coach K
okay. Was that about the footprint, or was that about these guys are all top
these are
five
number
guys?
one, number two guys? But to be fair though, it seems like K may have towards the end of his term did get some guys, but I mean it sounds like there's a big gap. Because, like, I don't know who's the next recent guy. Those are very recent guys. Ingram and Giles. And obviously Carter.
Yeah, it's 2016, 2017.
Yeah, and Wendell, that's like, you said Wendell Carter, Wendell Moore?
Wendell Moore.
Moore, right. Moore was...
Carter's from...
right, yeah, I thought that was right. So that's... So to me, like, I think that it seems like there's a gap though between like maybe what recent history has been and what the past has been.
Yeah,
again,
and a small number. I'm sure if I check North Carolina, players. NBA
there's
players,
plenty of guys that could have helped Duke.
Or North Carolina stars that are from North Carolina is probably a large portion.
Yeah, a lot of Tar Heels probably on that.
List. Like you said, guys like Dennis Smith that at one point people thought was going to Duke, ends up at NC State. John Wall at one point, a guy that Duke wasn't even really recruiting.
Right.
It was the number one player in the country from North Carolina. And if you know anything about John Wall, even now, he reps North Carolina heavy. Like, so does Dennis Smith. Like those guys, are both huge in that state and in that basketball community, a very basketball rich tradition.
Yeah.
Very basketball rich state. So the fact that neither one of them really considered Duke late down the stretch is shows you what their recruiting philosophy was, and seems like there isn't any switch in that right now.
Yeah, it will be fascinating to continue to see how that ends up shaking out. But shout out to Scheyer for this really strong class that he's able to put together so
Josh
far.
Nolan Smith as well,
Yeah,
also on the staff. This is only
absolutely.
getting elevated.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to both those gentlemen. I want to talk about some other major commitments from this month that definitely caught my eye. So Florida beat out Memphis to nab versatile power forward Malik Reneau. Um, I've watched some of this kid. I really like his game. He's extremely skilled, um, ferocious around the basket. I think he's an impact player. Florida, that's a great grab for them. And then Jalen Hood-Schifino, pardon me if I mispronounce that name, guard, he signed or commits to Mike Woodson's Indiana Hoosiers. So we talked a lot about Indiana and Mike Woodson and how would he be able to recruit. I think this guy is a steal. I don't know what he's ranked. I think he's ranked. I saw him in the 20s or 25, 26 area. I mean, this guy is a certified bucket. I mean, he's not the most athletic guy. He's not necessarily a guy, he's definitely a below the rim type of player. But you talk about crafty, you talk about creative, and just like I just love the way he just kind of approaches kind of just his offensive game plan in terms of getting the ball in the basket. I was just thoroughly impressed watching some of his games over the past few days. And I think that these are two guys that I think will make impacts. What did you make of these commitments, both for Florida and IU?
Yeah, I mean, starting with Hood-Schifino, I mean, huge get for Mike Woodson. He's going to be the centerpiece of that class, and I think he's the guy that Indiana fans they're gonna love this guy because
I think so too.
Like you said, a guy that just really knows how to play the game, knows how to put the ball in the basket, is gonna be. I mean, he was the guy on his AAU team Tad out of Tennessee. He's a big, strong, physical guard who can score at all levels. He can handle the rock. He can play off the ball, and he's a guy that I think about. Obviously, think about someone like Romeo Langford who was last at Indiana and did not have the year that Indiana fans would have hoped he would have had. That was a player that was a lot more raw, in the way he went about his business, and it's still sort of raw in NBA terms. Hood-Schifino is a guy that's going to come in and be, at least college ready,
Big Ten
ready.
Yeah, he's very
polished from day one, and he's not going to have any real transition, I don't think. The question is just going to be what kind of talent is he surrounded by, and Mike Woodson's recruited well. They're going to have a pretty good roster this season, and we'll see. Obviously, the transfer portal for a school like Indiana is going to be a big. It's going to be a big tool. It's also going to be something they're going to have to. They're going to have to keep guys, but
yeah, they got to
they're going to stay off and keep guys, but that'll also be an opportunity for them to improve their talent pool because obviously schools like Kentucky and Duke and Memphis are gobbling up all of the top 10, top 15 impact players. So you're gonna have to use the transfer portal to get your guys, and that honestly may be a better way of building your team. I mean, a team like Kentucky is gonna have all freshmen next year, whereas if Indiana builds their team around Hood-Schifino and guys that are returning and a couple of transfers from other Power 5 programs, and now all of a sudden you have a team that's veteran, you have a team that has a stud freshman, and a team that has a chance to really do some things in the Big Ten. So big get for them. And like you said, Reneau, a kid that I know Memphis really wanted. I know Florida State really wanted him.
Mm-hmm.
And so for Florida to be able to nab him against two schools that
recruiting beasts,
recruiting powers.
Yeah,
recruiting powers at this point. So to keep him in state and to keep him at Florida is a huge get for them. And Mike White, a program that has been, in a little bit of a malaise. I was
gonna say that.
They've been good. They've been in the tournament pretty much every year, but they're a program that also wants to compete for national championships. This is a very good start. A little like a poor man's kind of Bleed Cousins kind of game, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Really good offensive player, really forced down low, and I think has a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you had a good kind of taking the temperature there of the Florida program because, there was a time when Billy Donovan was there where they were winning national championships back-to-back years where it felt like, Florida. We talk about people having their runs or teams having their runs. It felt like Florida was here to stay. It's just like a perennial national power that every year they're gonna have a chance to win national championship. And we're a long away from that. I mean, Florida has not been at that level in a long time. They've had some good seasons that have ended in disappointment in the tournament. They've had some seasons where they had high expectations and didn't play as well. And then when they get to the tournament, they're a lower seed, so they get bounced first or second round. They've had years like last season where they had a pretty good season. They overcame the terrible situation with Keontae Johnson. You get a 15 seed in the second round. You think, okay, we got Trey Mann balling. Maybe we can make this a great run here. Maybe to the Elite Sweet 16, maybe an Elite 8 run, and then you can't beat Oral Roberts. So Mike White is kind of in this weird spot. I think again, the most of the time they're in the tournament, they're a competitive team. I'm wondering with that administration and that coaching staff, is that enough right now? I feel like Florida as an athletic school is kind of in a weird spot, like because football was the same way. Football, we thought they would just be in it every year during the Urban Meyer stuff. And they haven't been at that level in a long time, and it seems like they're kind of stuck in the mud a little bit. Again, not bad enough to where we got to rehaul everything, but I do kind of wonder.
It's more defensible in football when you're competing against Alabama.
Right, and they Mike White's been competing with Kentucky, and Kentucky's been down. He hasn't seen that kind of juggernaut. Like Rick Barnes came into a Tennessee program that you want to talk about being stuck in the mud and just turning your tires. I mean, they had different coaches and just kind of not really doing anything. He comes in and they're immediately a SEC contender. So we haven't quite seen that with Florida. Arkansas, Arkansas, Alabama. I mean, last year we saw two programs come out of nowhere. Yeah. Now they look like they're here to stay. So I do think this was kind of important for White. One, because I think Reneau can ball. I really think this guy is going to be an impact player. But I think that they kind of turned the tide, because he's been there for a while now. This is not a new coach who's been there for 2 years. I mean, he's been there for
all
a
those
good
guys
minute.
that we named. I want to say all those guys that we named, maybe besides Barnes, but even Barnes, I think all those guys got there after Mike White.
I think Barnes did too. Yeah.
Yeah, Billy Donovan's been gone for a while now. So,
right.
He's been there. He's been there for a long time, and again, they went to an Elite Eight at one point, so they're not with Chris Chiozza. So they've had success, but I think last year, really the last 2 years, is when the Florida fans, you started to hear chirping of, is it time to move on? I mean, Mike Miller is a guy that I think a lot of Florida fans have thought about and said, look, he coached at Memphis. He's an alum. The alum thing is hot now in college basketball. Just hire the next best alum from the NBA. And look, I mean, that would, and Mike Miller as a Memphis fan, I can attest is a heck of a recruiter. So definitely. That's a guy that's waiting in the wings, and you have to think that if that job opened up, that's when he would certainly consider. So. This is a big year for Mike White.
Do you think? And it's funny because I mentioned the football thing. One of the things that I think made Donovan a special coach, and I think we've seen Nate Oates I think we've seen him successfully do it in Alabama. He said that I used the football program to recruit for basketball. I know towards the end there was that weird beef between the football and basketball players, but for a lot of that success, he said a lot of this was built on us recruiting players to be like, look at this football program and just look how fun it is to be here, and think about what we could be if this football program could be this great. And I think that in many ways, even though he got there, he was doing great even before. He did great with Spurrier was there, but Herb got there. I think we saw that even get ratcheted up because Herb really took them to a different level, and we saw Billy Donovan take his team to a different level. Do you feel like is there a chance that has hurt Mike White's recruiting, like that Florida has been down in football for, we say down, but I mean just not at Urban's level. I mean I think they've probably been kind of where they've always been.
Just not a playoff
relatively. But not a team that can win a national championship. Not a team that's even competing for a national championship. Do you think that's hurt them a little bit? Because I mean I think that Florida football again it's not the same right now. The swamp is still the swamp, but it's I'm just curious if you think that may be playing a little bit of a factor in recruiting and some of the things like that.
By the time people listen to this, they may have already beaten Alabama at the Swamp, or they may have lost by 30. So we'll know by the time. We'll know one way or another.
I'm sure if they win, we'll know. They'll let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we'll see in the comments. But I think that doesn't help. Sometimes that a bad coach or a coach that can't use that properly, it can swallow them up a little bit. Where it's like, this is now a football school, it's not a basketball school, and that hurts. I
Yeah.
think I think there are a lot of schools where they want to be football schools, but they're primarily basketball schools. Like, I think even Indiana last year was kind of hurt by the fact that, and Archie Miller was hurt by the fact the Indiana football team was so good
All right. Yeah.
because
Okay. Like
it was like
they don't got the
we know what's been going on with
resources.
Indiana basketball.
We know they don't got the resources basketball teams getting. So how are they winning? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, no, that's something that certainly will be paid attention to. Um, and I think Mike White, I don't know, I think he's a good basketball coach, and I think that he was the right guy at the time to replace Billy Donovan.
I definitely agree with that.
But I wonder if he needs a change of scenery as much as Florida does, and that's something
Yeah.
we'll have to see.
He definitely strikes me as the guy that gets you to the guy. You know, like especially when you're replacing again a legend. Sometimes the first hire you're always trying to hire the best guy possible, but sometimes just the circumstances and what you need at that time, the guy you hire ends up just being the guy that gets you to the guy that's going to win you a championship. Just like Mark
Right.
Jackson was the guy that got them to Steve Kerr when the Warriors won a championship. But sometimes it stinks for all parties involved, especially the person that ends up not maybe getting the flowers they deserve once that team gets to that level. Mike White has really kind of held the line in terms of keeping Florida semi-relevant, and I think he's done a decent job. But again, we're talking about if Florida is trying to be at a national championship caliber level. I don't think we've seen that on the recruiting trail. I don't think we've seen that on the court. Definitely over the past 4 or 5 years, and you just wonder, are they just okay with this? Some programs would be. Some programs would be fine with just going to the tournament every year, being a pretty good team every year or so. You can maybe have a chance to win the SEC, and it'd be great. If he did that, if he did this at, I know Arkansas is having a really good run. At least they had a really great season with Musselman last year. But if he did this at Arkansas, he would never lose his job. Like they would be fine with it.
Yeah. Ole Miss.
Ole Miss especially. Vanderbilt. If you do this, he never has to look for another job. We think Florida would have more expectations, so you wonder if they're gonna if the buzzers will start to circle around there if we don't see another step up on from that program. But I want to wrap the show, Kendall, talking about another commitment that caught my attention. It caught my attention because it's from my hometown of New York City. Not my home borough. This comes from the Bronx. 3-star Jaquan Sanders announced he was staying close to home by joining the St. John's Red Storm. So the commitment is another local win for head coach Mike Anderson, who I think is in his third year at St. John's. He faced questions when he was hired about whether or not he could recruit from New York's fertile, homegrown talent crop. That's been kind of the conversation we've always talked about with New York City is if St. John's is going to be good, you have to be able to recruit the local area at a high level. We've seen floundering success from a lot of the recent coaches that have been at St. John's, and we've seen a lot of great players from this area leave to go to other schools, and St. John's has faltered really for much of this, really 20 years. I think, pretty much since the Ron Artest and LeVar Postel era of St. John's basketball. Shout out to Eric Barkley. It's been some really down years. So this was an interesting recruit to me, even though he's a 3-star. A lot of people, Jaquan Sanders, I think, is also underrated. Just like most New York City guards. And when you combine this with you have Posh Alexander, standout freshman in the Big East last year. He's from Brooklyn, another 3-star unheralded kind of guy. They signed 2 guys from the Long Island, Nassau County powerhouse of Long Island Lutheran, Rafael Pinzone and Dissa Triar. So you got those guys, you got Posh, and of course their star player Julian Champagnie very well could be Big East Player of the Year this year. Maybe could be an All-American this season. Comported himself well during the NBA pre-draft process. Decided to come back to school. He comes into this season. He wasn't recruited by Mike Anderson, but in some way Mike Anderson had to get him to come back and keep him around the program when the coaching change happened. And he's a prominent star also from Brooklyn. He went to Bishop Loughlin High School. Shout out to the Catholic High School League, a league that I played in. So I think there's some excitement right now with the St. John's Red Storm. there's a feeling that maybe a return to prominence could start. Because it didn't feel like that was possible without effectively recruiting the five boroughs of the tri-state area. So I pose the question to you, Kendall. Do you feel this sense of a shift in Queens with Mike Anderson that maybe I and other St. John's fans are feeling?
Wait, you're asking me, is St. John's back?
I'm not doing the St. John's is back. I got between Miami football and St. John's basketball. Like, I'm so tired of is the youth back? Is St. John's back? I can't. So I refuse to pose any questions about those programs in that manner. I've been dealing with those questions literally for 20 years with both programs. So that's why I phrase it as, do we see a shift? Not are they back? Is a shift happening? Because we know what St. John's has been, and are we moving to a more positive step with what we've seen from the Johnnies?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think recruiting is all about momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we saw St. John's team last year that comported themselves well in the Big East. They played well. They were scrappy. I think this year is going to be big in keeping that momentum steady. It's tough. I feel like you said, New York is really good. I really like Rafael Pinzone, a kid they brought in, like you said, out of Lehigh, out of Long Island Lutheran, guard who can score on all three levels, and I think he's gonna play from day one as a freshman. But it's tough in today's landscape. The Big East is a tough conference. It's tough to recruit only locally, unless you're getting everybody, or unless you're getting the best guys as well. It's tough to do that and compete with like a Creighton or a Xavier or some of these programs that are really good. So we'll see. The thing about Mike Anderson that I think we all may have missed when they brought him in, and what we've seen so far, is that he doesn't need a bunch of 5 stars to win. And that was the thing with Chris Mullin, is that when they got Chris Mullin, the assumption was he would almost be like what Penny is at Memphis, and that he's just going to get all the best players from New York, and that if you just get all the best players from New York, it doesn't matter how good of a coach he is, because you're going to win. I don't know if the recruiting has really shifted that much from Mullin to Mike Anderson. You're getting around the same level of player, but Mike Anderson's a more experienced, college basketball coach. And, I think we've seen, if he's getting guys like Jaquan Sanders, and, if Jaquan Sanders is the next Polish Alexander, or the next Julian Champagny, and they're getting these guys that, may come in, high 3-star, borderline 4-star guys, and they play, and they're all freshman Big East players, then yeah, this is the shift. But I don't know if the shift is from a recruiting standpoint, or if it's from a player development standpoint.
Yeah, I think you made a great point about the coach being just more competent, being a large part of some of the early success we see from Mike Anderson. And it sounds disrespectful to Chris Mullin. I don't mean it disrespectfully, only because Chris Mullin has never coached before. So there's just some. Right. So when I say competence, it's just he was a rookie coach who never coached on any level. Yes, of course he was a great player, and yes, of course he was a great executive, or at least a good executive. I don't want to worry fans over fans.
Yeah, exactly.
He was an executive in the NBA.
He was an executive.
Yes, he was an executive in the NBA. Of course, he's was a great Hall of Fame level player in the NBA at St. John's, and just New York City basketball icon. So let me just put respect on Chris Mullin's name in that regard. He was a coach who never coached before. And I think there were, in many ways, when we watched some of those St. John's teams, some teams that we felt like had decent talent, they didn't comport themselves like a well-coached team. So the results were the results. I think we see, you're right. I think we see with Mike Anderson is he's been able to take kids, some unheralded, some guys that maybe were overlooked, and develop them and coach them up and get them to play system basketball. And that's what we hear so much about. What's important is just having an identity on a team. And we know, St. John's identity is they're going to get up and down the floor. They're going to get up in your grill. They're going to take a lot of threes. And the game's going to be a little wild. It's going to be helter-skelter. But, to be honest, that's how New York City basketball is. That's how you ever watching the New York City AAU game, like what house St. John's plays is how every New York City AAU team plays here. So it all made sense in that regard. We were questioning again, does this guy who has great ties to the South and has coached his entire career in the South, does he fit, New York City? Does he understand the importance of what it means to have kids from this city wearing St. John's across their chest? It means a lot. It just means a lot, not just from a talent standpoint, but I think it means a lot just from a spiritual and just a emotional standpoint for the fan base and for the city. And clearly he values that greatly. We didn't he said it, but we've seen other guys say it and not really put it to use. He said it and meant it, and I think we've seen some of the fruits of that labor. And I think what's important is when you use the word momentum. Nobody's saying, "Oh, you come in day one and you're getting the next Felipe Lopez." A guy who's the number one player from New York City. And like who's a all world kind of guy. And he's going to St. John's year one. I think that's not realistic. I think what we want as St. John's fans is a coach who comes in. We're not getting the the JUCO guy from Texas to fill a spot, or we're not getting a guy from I don't know, like Georgia, 2-star from Georgia. Right. When there's a kid from New York who's been dying to play at Madison regard, who wants that spotlight, who has that hunger, who knows what it means to be at St. John's, not even getting an offer or not even getting recruited, and we're seeing those guys get the respect and the recognition that they deserve. So what's going to happen is, as we see those kids get into the program and have success, again, a kid like Poch Alexander come in, and what was he did? I think he was Defensive Player of the Year last year in the Big T's. He might have been Freshman of the Year. Like, have great success. He could have maybe went to another school outside of the city, and maybe he would have been great. Maybe he would have been on the bench. Who knows? But he came to St. John's and helped them win a lot of games, and they were a pretty solid team last year, a surprise team last year. Champagny, he's going to work out for the NBA teams after playing in St. John's. That may entice the next top guy out of New York City, that 5-star guy, that top 50 guy that says, well, you know what, there are some New York kids that went down there and really balled out. Like, maybe St. John's is the place for me. The problem is we haven't seen, besides Shamari Pons, we haven't seen anyone else really in that kind of space in a really long time.
Yeah, and they're also bringing in Tariq Coburn, right?
Yeah,
a kid from kid I actually went to school with.
You went to school with. Yeah, and he's a really good 3-point shooter.
Local kid from Hofstra. They're gonna look.
So the kid from Soriano also. The kid from I think he was from Fordham. He's transferring as well.
When you see what people forget is that when you have these guys, sometimes we think in this prism of just 5 stars and USA basketball. Oh, this kid played with this kid at USA basketball, or like Jalen Green played with Josh Christopher and saying AAU team for a weekend. But like when you're talking about a local footprint, like if Poch Alexander balls out and he was a 3-star kid from the city, I don't know off the top of my head what AAU program he played for, but if Poch Alexander played for the New York Rens, or he played for the PSA Cardinals or the New York Gauchos, whatever AAU program, he's played with the next 5-star that's coming up out of New York. Exactly. Or he's played, for the next 4 years, he's played, or his AAU coach is going to have another 5-star that maybe he didn't play with, but that AAU coach can speak to, oh yeah, my last guy who's not as good as you, or maybe wasn't as good as you in high school, is now going to the NBA, or is now one of the best players in the Big East. That stuff matters.
Exactly.
That stuff helps you recruiting. You can't just recruit out of left field all over unless you're Duke, you can do that. But
yeah,
because then you're talking about USA basketball, you're talking about all this other stuff that for a school like St. John's, those connections and that track record matters.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've seen too many really good players, guys that aren't all Americans, but good players go to other schools and they're playing great. Like how did this guy leave New York City? Like, or, guys who maybe from Long Island, like how did they leave the island? How did they get all the way to Corbello in Illinois? Like some of these places you're just like it's St. John's. St. John's is not
Alvarado.
Even the yeah. Alvarado. I mean, come on, that's what was that? Christ the King? Yeah. Like I mean, like so.
Musa Cisse, another Christ the King kid.
Right.
Obviously,
Exactly.
a guy like Precious Achiuwa, like you lose those guys.
Come on.
And again, you want to know how you get those guys, those 5-star guys, a kid like Kyle Filipowski. Again, those guys got to work out on the lower level, and those guys at the lower level need to have better experiences so that you can get the 5-star guys. That's how you build. That's how you build a real recruiting region. That's what Rutgers is building. That's what
Definitely
Seton Hall built at a time, when Kevin Willard first got.
Yeah, and St. John was asleep, and Kevin Willard was.
How did Kevin Willard get Miles Powell? It's because Kadeem Carrington had a great career at Seton Hall. It's because Isaiah Whitehead made it to the NBA. It's because Angel Delgado had a great career at Seton Hall. When those guys all hit, they were able to get whoever they wanted out of New Jersey.
Right. Exactly, and that ends up being, the way, as Kendall said, as you build your really recruiting footprint in this area of the New York City area.
And Kevin Willard's
No.
not a New York legend, not a New Jersey legend.
No.
His dad was coaching at Holy Cross.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't, we're not talking about, like, I don't know, we're not talking about, God Shamgod is coaching at Seton Hall, or, somebody that I'm expecting, nobody.
Rod Strickland,
Rod Strickland.
Yeah.
Mark Jackson. We're talking
Right.
about Kevin Willard.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about, we don't need the next New York celebrity to come and coach St. John's for them to get guys out of New York.
Yeah. I think this next season will be important. I think there will be expectations for St. John's to compete at a high level in the Big East. I don't want, some people will pick them to beat. I think some people are already picking them to win the Big East. I don't want to put that pressure on them, but they definitely a 5th or 6th, 6th finish in the Big East is not acceptable this year. I think that there are people who think they should do much better.
Other kids that off the top of my head that I'm thinking about they got none of those Jelly Fam kids, man. Washington.
Washington
guys, Jaquan Quinterly.
Quinterly's balling out in Alabama.
As Reed, like all of those guys ended up going to different schools.
A whole movement that originated in New York City. St. John's had no impact, no imprint on any of it.
In the NIL era, I would have said those kids would have made more money if they would have went to a school like St. John's. Yeah. But they were a couple years too late. I mean, Quinterly's still playing, so he'll be able to profit off it. But
he better bring out all the old Jelly Fan swag he's got and everything. I hope he's cashing on everything, because man, like, you want to talk about a kid who, in all that whole group that like really absolutely, didn't get to really monetize that moment that they created. So it was unfortunate. I'm hoping that he can get anything out of that, because Jelly Fam was a thing for sure. But that's going to do it for this edition, the 10th episode of the Uncommitted Podcast. Of course, if you like this podcast, if you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, New Generation Media. We do a basketball recruiting podcast every month. So make sure, if you like this conversation, subscribe to the YouTube channel. This podcast is also on our audio platform. So make sure you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn as well. Thank you guys so much again for checking this out. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.